Hey, good evening to everyone. Everyone tuning in live, catching us pre-recorded on a repeat on YouTube. You guys know the drill. We are the Invisible Night School. I'm your host, Leah Prime. So I'll be inviting my co-hosts on this evening. I have Nick here, and then I also have Lewis. Unfortunately, we are missing Campbell tonight. He's off on family duty. So you've got, three legs of the four-legged stool of the Invisible Night School here to bring you the hottest takes in ufology, Twitter, Fortiana, the occult. I don't want to overpromise. Yeah. Yes. Hello to Ivy Bells. Good to see you. Haven't seen your name before. Super happy you're joining us. Spooky, friends, Romans, quadrupeds. Yes. Thank you. Ace Ways. Hey, everyone. Nice to see you guys. Thanks for joining us. So we'd initially anticipated doing like an open line style show, and that's totally what we're going to do. But we didn't have the big thing we were going to talk about, which of course is the government report, which has not been turned in.
No.
Word on the street is it's coming out tomorrow, according to some Twitter people in the know.
I think Greenwald made that claim.
Yeah, Katie Howland also posted about it, saying they're calling it like UFO Eve with a lot of little Christmas emojis.
That's cute.
Yeah, our Savior and Redeemer will arrive tomorrow. And so without having this document to discuss, instead we're just going to have open floor. We've put out some calls for other people to jump on the stream with us and join the conversation. We'll see if they do. And otherwise, it's basically going to be a free-for-all with me, Nick, and Lewis.
I'm going to be sending some messages out to you, see if we can get some other people to join, some surprise guests. But yeah, awesome. in lieu of the report, there was a handful of articles that came out over the past week. Did anybody catch any of those? I read
there was the one Friday from the Times.
Yeah.
Which came out, by Julian Barnes? And that certainly provoked a very strong response among the community.
I thought that was strange. I read it just earlier. I was playing catch up, and I didn't really understand what was so divisive about it. It's all a lot of stuff everybody already knows. There were some anonymous claims in there saying multiple references to space aliens being ruled out and stuff. So maybe it was just the language. Which I can see that other perspective of being feeling that maybe is a little condescending. But on the other hand, and my thought on that always is why are we inclined to even include that as an option to look at, right? Where does that come from? We talk about all the time that it comes from kind of that cultural zeitgeist idea of UFOs and aliens being intrinsically linked. But why is that an option why is that a box we're even trying to check? Right.
And it also goes back to this idea that no matter what is discussed in the popular press, no matter what the government actually winds up saying, it's going to be wrong. Like the community
Yeah,
is going to respond in
right.
a way that no matter what is said, it's going to be wrong.
Mhm.
Too many liberties were taken. There's too many biases. The epistemology here is all fakakta. There's no science,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find any contributing author, researcher, scientist, astronomer, etc., who wasn't in some way compromised or biased just by virtue of having proceeded through higher education and industry. Um,
So the New York Times piece that mentioned, I didn't read it, but is that the one that said like basically that many UFOs are probably military or foreign?
Yeah. Well,
or airborne trash.
yeah,
Gosh,
between
yeah.
the two there, yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Which, yeah, I think that's like a sound conclusion to come to, even with what little evidence we do have right now. I don't know. I think there was like a couple of there's a couple other articles that came out too, with more of a different perspective. I didn't get a chance to read those. I noticed that there was one that was being shared around by Gary Nolan about skeptics that I didn't even bother looking at. It came from an anti-vaxxer website.
Oh
That's
dear.
classic. Yeah. I think there was an ABC News piece, a Daily Mail.
Yeah, the Daily Mail one was more sympathetic to the cause. It seemed to kind of prognosticate about what they were expecting to come out of this report, and I would say not be as so summarily dismissive as the New York Times article was.
What were they basing that on? Their kind of conclusions they were drawing in that the Daily Mail one.
Probably like scoops from anonymous Twitter accounts.
Okay, so I mean that's
Makes sense.
you know,
Yeah, it's about par for the course when it comes to ufological reporting.
Sure.
I'm actually in the background. I'm trying to find that article, but it did seem like I would say it wasn't like when I say it wasn't as sort of dismissive as the Times article. Like it wasn't saying like, oh, it's airborne trash, oh, it's identifiable, whatever. It was more about like what they expect the structure of the report to look like and like who would be the end consumers of it.
Okay, cool. No, the report itself is late, right? Wasn't it supposed to show up by Halloween?
That's what they said. They said October 31st, and I'd heard like some speculation that it could be that the report's already been turned in, but it's classified, so they can't really release anything yet. There's not a redacted version of it available for like public perusal or review. It could also just be that there has been no report delivered at all.
Sure.
Who I feel really bad for in all of this, besides poor Julian Barnes, who was reporting in the Times, and then like the unwatched masses of Twitter were like mass doxing him and reporting him for having the audacity to write this news article. Like let's be real, there's lots of reasons to be critical of the New York Times, but I'm not sure I'd put their ufological reporting at the top of the heap.
Sure.
But in addition to him, the person who I always feel bad for, and maybe gonna fuel the fire here with Leah being an op, is how do you say her name? Susan Goff?
Susan Goff.
Like she must be harassed 24/7, 365 around this stuff. She must be grinding her teeth into little tiny nubs.
Yeah, she is like the central like villain now, right? Everyone's towing her line.
Yeah, everyone's mad about her. They think she's like the sole individual holding up disclosure. I think it's a lot of it's kind of predicated, I think, on her master's thesis or her graduate thesis, which was like about misinformation or something, and people have extrapolated from that she is the shadowy force preventing us from knowing what's actually going on.
Right. Wasn't it Elizondo who said he was using his intelligence community training on the UFO community as well? So isn't it kind of like two sides of the same thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess
I'm sure misogyny doesn't factor into this at all.
Sure. And whoever's validating your faith-based beliefs.
Oh, interesting. Simon's chiming in. The Daily Mail is written by Chris Sharp's mate. Fascinating.
Oh.
Yeah, Chris Sharp's Liberation Times or whatever it's called.
Yep.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, Daily Mail, well-known paper of record, right? Journalistic integrity, top of the heap.
What did you guys think about the sorry, and we can come back to the New York Times and this latest government report. But what did you guys think of the latest Green Street piece about Brandon Fugel.
I didn't watch it. I haven't seen it yet.
Have you, Leo?
Yeah, so I watched like the last half of it, and then I watched the first few minutes. So first, like I will say, so I used to have a big client out in Salt Lake, so it's really wild watching them drive around because like I know all the places they're zipping around in Fugel's like Batmobile car. He has a car that looks like it should be on like a poster on a 13-year-old's bedroom wall.
Of
Um,
course.
it you know, it's Green Street like cuts off, of course, right when it starts getting interesting. It's more about sort of his meet and greet with Fugel, like entry into Skinwalker Ranch, the sort of
Mm,
associated rituals and stuff that Fugel has sort of overlaid on this experience. Like there's this
mm,
striking scene where they're all going in on Fugel's helicopter, and they say a prayer before entering into this land, right? And of
okay.
course, Greenstreet's tying this back to his experience in Mormonism, right? Because he
Mhm.
was raised LDS and has subsequently left the church. But you get the sense that there's still like a heavy emphasis sort of on this ritualistic, like good luck style thinking or sort
Yeah.
of like enchantment style thinking, which is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and Green Street was, I thought by and large, relatively sympathetic so far, or at least like wasn't, being outwardly critical or insulting or anything.
Mhm.
So the basement office didn't turn into a ghost hunting show.
Not yet, but
No.
there's going to be another episode soon.
Oh yeah,
So
part two.
that may change. Yeah.
The thing I found funny was that they keep saying all this stuff about electronics failing at Skinwalker,
Mhm.
right? Like that whatever the equipment batteries run out all of a sudden
Classic.
and all this stuff. But like they arrive there in a super high tech helicopter.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like?
It's because they prayed over the helicopter, but
Yeah,
not
they did pray.
quarters.
Yeah, I guess that
Power
fixes.
of prayer.
But I mean, in that documentary, Fugel said that, or it might have been his brother flying the.
Yep,
the
his
heli-
brother was the actual pilot.
Yeah, one of them said that there are dangerous and malevolent forces at Skinwalker.
But enough about the Mormons. What's going on with the
Yeah, I
creatures
know.
there?
I know. I've got nothing.
Hey.
Oh,
No, I like that. Good one. Shit, I lost my train of thought. Pick it up. You were talking about the equipment failure is such a classic ghost hunting trope.
Mhm.
And I mean in ghost lore, that's spirits manifesting and taking the energy from the batteries to try to manifest. And by manifest, that means like turn a loosely screwed flashlight in or make a sound in the distance, just a disembodied sound. But yeah, I mean that's a pretty typical.
In UFO lore as well, the UFO like shuts down the electronics of the car and it
Oh right,
stops
yeah.
and all that. There's also that famous Iranian fighter jet incident in 1976.
oh yeah,
I
the
think.
Tehran. Yeah, the Tehran
Yeah,
sighting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's in Leslie Kean's book.
Mhm. Yeah. But
Yeah.
Brian Dunning has a piece on that, and he mentions that the General Dynamics, or the company that was doing maintenance on those jets, because this is pre-revolution Iran, so the Shah was still in power. And this company was doing maintenance work on those planes, and they noted that in one of like their internal reports or something, that at that base the planes were not being kept very, like maintenance was just generally poor. And so like those electronics might have failed in any case, without any UFO. So you have to take that
Right.
stuff into account.
Right. Plus, if you factor in like all the plasma theories and stuff, the presence of course, plasma or high voltage electricity is also going to affect electronics functioning and radio functioning and all that. We have, yes, maybe the helicopter had a dashboard saint statue. I'm not sure the Mormons are into that stuff. That's like more of a Catholic affectation. But who knows? We don't discriminate when it comes to saving our eternal souls, I guess. And Simon says, Mormons from Outer Space, great film. Dude, you got the title wrong. It's called Iron Sky, but you're close.
Haven't seen it.
Oh my god, dude, I can't believe you haven't seen Iron Sky. It's like
Just laugh.
it's it would be good study material for exploring the secret space program and our friend Marina Saren. It's about Nazis on the
Oh
moon.
yeah.
It is
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, it came out about 10 years ago.
Was there a sequel? I think there was like an inner
Yeah,
where Hitler was riding riding on a T-Rex in the inner Earth.
yes, yeah, there's a sequel, and I think there may even be a third one coming out. The only reason I know this much depth about Iron Sky lore is this band Laibach did the soundtrack, and I love Laibach. Laibach is this like really early like industrial art music project,
Mhm.
and they did all the soundtracks. Um,
That sounds pretty
and
interesting.
I would say for the unsophisticated mind, you'd probably make a whole lot of conclusions about Leibach's political alignment. But if you do some kind of digging into their whole shtick and like their political activism and performance art and stuff, you see that they're not in any sense sympathetic to far right ideology whatsoever.
I
Yeah,
see.
they play with the visuals a lot, but like they used to do some really cool stuff. They're from Ljubljana. Like Laibach is the German term for Ljubljana, Slovenia. Um, and like in the 80s, they used to basically make up like fake passports to get people out of the Balkans and hand them out at their shows and stuff during the wars. They have this kind of long history of like highly subversive political activism, hinging really heavily on sort of a lot of like military aesthetics, but very much aligned, I would say, with borderless worker solidarity, like pretty cool avant-garde stuff, but it requires a little bit of, I would say, like legwork to get into their music instead of just
Sure.
being like, oh, these guys seem really weird and they're in a Nazi movie. The soundtrack's pretty good too. Like the Iron Sky soundtrack's pretty solid. I don't have it on vinyl, but it is pretty good.
It's worth trying out. Luis, you had kind of an idea of something you wanted to bring tonight, didn't you?
Well, I was going to talk about astrobiology and
Mhm.
SETI, but I prefer to leave that to a future episode.
Okay. That was
I just want to make sure that it's coherent and, can distill some, points that we can discuss instead of just stuff that interests me.
sure. I think there's a lot of
Sure.
crossover.
Yeah, I mean, I have the Benowitz.
Yeah, which is
flow
my
chart
favorite.
open on my other screen. I keep looking over to it because there's a lot going on there.
So I did suggest talking a little bit about Benowitz, the Benowitz case, because that's actually my favorite case. Because it's such a maybe it's not the first, but it's one of the first sort of UFOs conspiracy stories that really brings the conspiratorial style to the fore, like the paranoid anti-government angle.
Yeah.
Which would like become popular with the X-Files. But Benowitz was also friends with William Cooper.
Yeah.
And
the Behold a White Horse, Behold a Pale Horse, and the radio host, right?
Right. Who
was killed by the feds.
At least deputies. I think they were trying to serve a warrant for tax evasion. He died. I think one of the deputies was also killed. At least it was shot. But that's the chart that I made.
Can you see this?
Mapping the.
Yeah,
Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit.
I didn't know Benowitz knew Bill Cooper. That's interesting.
Yeah, they had a falling out later on. I think Bill Cooper kind of came to reject the alien hypothesis, and he just assumed everything was a government conspiracy, like that the government was like faking aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we've seen the UFO alien to full government paranoid conspiracy theorist pipeline. It's alive every day on Twitter.
All too common.
It looks like Lewis, this is one of your world famous flowcharts, extremely detailed, right? Has everybody on it, all these
I try to update it
and projects.
And let me just show the books that I got the information from. These are not exclusively where I got the info from, but the first one is Mirage Man.
Yep.
Mirage Man by Mark Pilkington.
Oh,
then, Project Beta. Damn it. Project Beta by Greg Bishop, and Sources, Spooks, and Kooks by Adam Gorightly.
Mm.
Oh,
Never-
Adam Gorightly, the perennial favorite, because he also wrote that book on Adamski, right?
Yeah, The Contactees, which I've also read.
Yeah.
That's a great book.
A is for Adamski, I think, is the one he wrote.
Yeah, eight for Adamski, which he
Right.
co-authored with Greg Bishop.
Cool. Yeah, so we have your flow chart here. It looks like a circuit diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
we have-
metabolic network.
Yeah, or a metabolic pathway chart or whatever. But yeah, so we have Paul Benowitz here right at this front and center. All roads lead to him.
Yeah, in one way or other. He was
Uh,
getting information from like Doty or disinformation from Doty as the story goes, but he was also in contact with other people, like I mentioned, Bill Moore, and they probably like were like a sewing circle. You know, Bishop is in there somewhere. I think he's in the bottom right
Where's
corner.
Bishop been? All right, in the bottom right. This is
we're
cool.
are we fairly confident that everyone listening knows the story of Paul Benowitz?
Well, that's Adam Gorightly. Sorry, maybe Bishop's not in this one yet. I'll put him in. So I don't know if everyone knows the story. Like it's so.
Yeah, let's do a rundown.
Yeah.
For
So
people just tuning in.
Paul Benowitz was a engineer. He trained as a physicist, but I think he dropped out of university or college to run his business. He was supplying electronics components to the military, and he lived nearby Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, and he was just like a mile away from the base, so he could like get a really great view of it. And the successful kind of patriotic guy. He had a family. And
what's the time frame we're talking about? Are we talking about 80s, 90s here?
Late 70s, I think, is when this started, and then into the 80s.
Yeah.
And Doty, who was a FOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, he was working at the base. A FOSI's task is basically to act as, I guess, counterintelligence for the Air Force, to weed out spies and also to investigate criminal activity associated with the Air Force bases. So like if anyone's doing any
they're like internal affairs for the Air Force.
And he's like enlisted, right? Like it's not like he's some high-ranking officer or anything.
No.
Yeah, he's an enlisted guy.
Right. So, but the story goes that Doty was feeding Benowitz a story, because let me just back up a little bit. Benowitz was noticing these lights kind of over the airfield that he could see at night from his porch or his front yard. And but he was also tapping into like the communications on the base, because he was very good with electronics. And he told the commanders on the base that like he could do this stuff. He was basically just telling them like, look, I can crack these communications. I'm just letting you know. Right. And they wanted to sort of clamp down on that. And Doty was kind of used to feed Benowitz's story to make him, so lead him on the wrong path, basically. So he was fed like a story about aliens. And so that Benowitz would kind of, be discredited if he ever talked about this stuff openly.
No, was Benefits a UFO guy before all this introduction?
To the extent that he was seeing these lights that he couldn't explain.
Okay.
But I don't think that he was really into UFOs as such before that.
And now, was Doty like officially? Do we know that Doty was officially assigned to do this, or could Doty have been working on his like own free will?
Yeah, I mean, he could have been. He claims that that was his job to feed the story to Benowitz, but I mean, you have to take everything that Doty says with a grain of salt.
Right.
More like a truckload of salt, but
yeah, absolutely. He makes some strange claims.
He's still going at it, and
yeah, he is.
People still believe him for
an
some
active
reason.
Figure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the thing with Doty, it reminds me a lot of Lazar in the sense where it's not necessarily that people believe him as much as he's become so woven into the community and like mythology that people want to hear what he has to say. It's sort of like Paris Hilton being famous for being famous. There's like this weird recursive loop around people like Dodie or Lazar, where just by virtue of having gotten so much attention, they have kind of like feel like they have almost an outsized significance, even though I think categorically most people know that they're full of shit.
I saw so many people on Twitter when he kind of reemerged there saying things like along the lines of like, "Oh, it's such an honor to meet you." I thought that was pretty strange.
We have Brooke here. Dodie tells his own alien story now, right? And that's like, you know, yeah. I can distinctly remember that Twitter space over the summer because he was talking about the Cash Landrum incident and was talking about how, oh, Cash Landrum, the sighting was an ET spacecraft that got out of control in Texas.
He said that?
Oh, yeah. He said it was an alien spacecraft.
He was feeding through Bill Moore to APRO during the time that it was a U.S. based technology, and he even knew like the tail number of it or the serial number. Back in the day.
Twitter space, it was an ET craft that was being brought from, and he knew the bases, but he was like it was being brought from this base to this base, and if I recall correctly, in the space he said that it was basically just throwing off tons of radiation because the guys who were supposed to pilot it had lost control of it.
Sure.
And by the way, Bob Lazar actually claimed in an early interview, like in the early 90s, that he thinks that the Cash Landrum UFO was actually a government engineered, like a secret craft.
Yeah.
That was using the same gravitational principles as the sport model.
Why did it have the big like jet engine on the bottom of it then? if it's using anti-gravity.
Yeah,
I don't know. Exactly. It's the sport model, but they slapped like a nitrous tank on it, like you do with the shitty Honda to make it go faster.
It was using plutonium instead of element 115, is his claim.
Right. Yeah.
Naturally, of course.
Anyway.
So let's talk. It's like one of the interesting things with Benowitz and with Dodie, I think. So I haven't read Mirage Men, but I watched the documentary. Is that something we want to talk about, right? Like what this film and book presents? Because I think that I see that as like a critical part to like the Benowitz kind of story arc.
And there's some disagreement as well among some of the people involved in the saga. So Walter Bosley, who was a former FOSI agent, I think his first name's Walter. He's got a YouTube channel, but he supposedly relayed a story to Pilkington that he'd seen a UFO like out in the desert with like special glasses at night. And that it was like a government operated machine. But then Bosley completely denies that he ever told that to Pilkington. So I don't know what the status of that story is. And it's sort of like a little bit of a what's that word? When two people don't like each other.
Enemies?
Yeah.
Not
adversarial?
Falling out or something between Pilkington and
Yes.
Over that, aspect. But I think the book itself was very good, and the documentary was pretty fair to the book. But some of the people in it, there was Linda Moulton Howe.
Yep.
She got a bit upset at first because she thought that Pilkington was just trying to cover for the government. And,
right.
And but anyway, basically, the premise is that the government is like muddying the waters, and it's making it difficult to investigate any of this stuff, which is fair enough, I guess.
Yeah, so I watched Mirage Man at the start of this summer. So when I was first really getting back into UFO stuff, and I can remember, I mean, I didn't know these constellation of figures. Like I didn't know Dodie or Benowitz or anything like this, but I do remember having the distinct impression from this documentary that the core message is the government is involved in the community and its narrative construction. and that this is demonstrated by Doty's involvement with Benowitz, and you can probably safely assume that this happens at a larger scale as well. And like, I don't know, in the past few months, like, I don't think that's a particularly long bow to draw to suppose that, you know, partly just, you know, it's a conspiracy culture, so of course there's going to be some degree of federal interest in infiltration, but, you know, also like there's huge amounts of like either, I would say, deliberate or ad hoc counterintelligence or misinformation or ops or anything like that.
Yeah, and especially with Jack Brewer's research, you see more of that, or at least hints of that, like from the 1950s and 60s with NICAP.
Yeah.
You know, Simon chimes in, Pilkington is from the UK and Bosley had something to do with the film. But what was that something, Simon? That's what we don't know.
He appeared in the film, at least.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard different stories about what was going on during this whole Doty and Benowitz affair. And one of the rumors that I heard was that Hynek and Valet may have been involved in it. Do you know anything about that?
And they're both on the far left there of the chart.
Oh, okay. Something about either Hynek or Valet providing a computer to Benowitz.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of that. Wasn't it that Hynek like provided the computer to Benowitz with all the fake communications with the aliens? And he was in cahoots with the Air Force, but I just don't believe that.
Right. I'm not even sure where that comes from. I wonder.
Bill Moore. I think Bill Moore is the first one who claimed that.
Oh, okay. Was this after he kind of did his mea culpa speech at that MUFON conference or before?
Whoa, wait, what's this?
Yeah, gosh, there's like a really poor quality tape of it of Bill Moore at a MUFON conference. Basically, like
he's being booed by everyone.
Yeah, and he's basically like, I was used by Doty, and
I was a pawn in Doty's 5-dimensional chess.
But he was also saying that he knew, but he accepted it because he wanted to get close to the heart of the secret.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He wanted to take it down from the inside.
I think he kept believing aspects of it even after that, like of the alien reality. But he at least came clean on Doty.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Bill Moore, before all this, he was like one of the big rising stars around Roswell, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that kind of shot his credibility after that point.
And then there's Falcon there. So you go ahead first, Leah. I was going to mention Falcon.
I was going to say we have Justin S. here commenting. He did UFO researchers a real favor by coming clean. This is Bill Moore, right? Yeah. Yeah. Big props to him, right? It's not easy to own up to that stuff. I'm sorry. Who are we looking at here?
Falcon.
Bill Moore. Falcon. Oh, yeah, right here.
So Falcon was supposedly, he was supposedly Doty's a Foci partner. And they would make visits to the Benowitz household and, feed Benowitz disinformation and stir him up is the story. But
do we know who he is?
No. Now, in the 1988 TV special UFO Cover-Up Live, there were a bunch of silhouetted people from the aviary. So the aviary is associated with Bill Moore. It's like 12 scientists or something, kind of like along the lines of MJ12, but a bit different.
But with a dorkier name.
Yeah, exactly. But Falcon was one of those people. But Falcon was actually Doty in silhouette on that TV special.
Yeah, they disguised his voice and kind of lit him.
Seriously?
Yeah, you got to watch UFO Cover-Up Live.
I have to. I've seen the sort of like grainy VHS versions uploaded. I need to take some.
Well, that's how you watch it.
But that documentary or that TV special had so many tropes that Bob Lazar would later copy, like just straight up copy.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, including Area 51. Like the name Area 51 was literally mentioned in that documentary.
Yeah. Justin chiming in here. Greg Bishop bringing Doty on Coast to Coast. Yeah, you know what? That's I did not realize Doty was on with Art Bell. That's fantastic, though. I mean, it makes sense. It's totally an appropriate guest. Sorry, Louis. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, just a bunch of tropes from that that TV special, like naming Area 51. There was also a mention of naval intelligence. Lazar claims that he was employed by the Department of Naval Intelligence. It's actually the Office of Naval Intelligence, but anyway.
Right.
But for some reason, naval intelligence is actually featured quite prominently over the decades in UFO lore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because of some spat between the. There's the word I was looking for: spat, not falling out. So
Spat.
between the Air Force and the Navy, because sometimes you get like these inter-rival, inter-bureaucracy rivalries.
Yeah.
But it could also be because the Navy covers a lot more of the world's area, right? So they got a much larger jurisdiction than the Air Force. And so they're probably interested in UFOs to a large extent, or maybe a larger extent than the Air Force. But that's just a hypothesis.
Oh, just as a quick aside, Leah, if you do decide to watch UFO Cover Up Live, there's also footage from the Hudson Valley event. So it's definitely
not creative reenactments, but actual
actual
footage.
footage. Yep. And
I can see the triangle pass overhead.
Well, there's one that
Can't wait.
looks. There's some lights in this distance. You can't really tell what it is, but then the second video is very clearly of planes flying in formation, and you can hear them. So, I mean, I think I mentioned this a long time ago, but that UFO Cover Up Live actually kind of twists the narrative and says that those planes were flying once to try to prove that that's what they were, and it was a failed attempt. That's kind of how they spun it. But it's clearly not true. I mean, the planes.
It's like my skeptical face, dude. I'm trying. I keep myself so locked up all day at work and on the internet, but
it's definitely worth a watch for everybody. I think it's on archive.org. In fact, if not, it's on YouTube 100%. So
yeah, from Brooke, the Air Force took the hard drives from the Navy's Nimitz incident. They also failed to contribute to UAP report number 1. But yes, Brooke, we're aware, but we're talking about Doty and Benowitz tonight, not the Tic Tacs, unfortunately.
All this new stuff.
That's still relevant though, because if there is something going on between the Air Force and Navy, that could be relevant to the UFO, how it developed.
That's a good point. Never mind, Brooke. Sorry for raking you over the coals publicly. You actually made an astute comment. So we're looking at this. What's the connection here to Thunder Scientific?
That was Benowitz's company.
Okay, and then talk to me about John Lear. Like, John Lear stands out in my mind as just like 10 pounds of crazy in a 5-pound bag when we're talking about like 1990s ufology, right? Like, what was his connection to Paul Benowitz? So
he was friends, or at least friendly, with Benowitz, and also with Bill Moore. It could have been Bill Moore and John Lear who had the falling out instead of Bill Moore and not Bill Moore. Cooper. I keep confusing.
I get those two.
Oh man, John Lear running around with Bill Cooper. That would have been like.
Yeah, but I mean, they were also friends, like for a while at least, until Cooper rejected the alien hypothesis. Lear was he was a very good pilot. Is he still alive, actually?
No, he passed away recently. He passed away, I think, about 1.5 or 2 years ago. But he was, he's the son of the inventor of the Learjet. He was known. I think he had over he had some crazy 10,000 hours flight or 50,000 or something crazy like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, interesting thing is that his father was actually interested in anti-gravity, because a lot of companies back then in the 50s and 60s were interested in the possibility of anti-gravity. There's actually a really good article on thedrive.com and the Warzone section, which talked about that history. So maybe John Lear heard something from his father and got inspired. The other thing is that Lear was actually an employee who at the Nevada test site in the early 80s, and he flew over the test site after nuclear tests to gather air particles in case because they were doing underground testing, but some of it spilled into the atmosphere. They wanted to know how much. So he was he had a security clearance there, at least for a while. He claims that he was the only civilian ever to land at Area 51. I don't know if that's true. But he definitely worked at the Nevada test site, if not Area 51. He was
Mhm.
very invested in UFOs. Famously, he went on George Knapp's news program in 1987. You can find that on YouTube
Right.
as well. Bunch of tropes there that he would later promote along with Bob Lazar, who he became friends with.
Right.
He
Him and
actually,
Bob Lazar were bros. And they were, I mean,
yeah,
this is all going on in Las Vegas too, because that's where Napa is as well. Yeah.
Right.
yes. And the other thing is, he just went like on a completely insane, path, like way beyond anything Lazar ever said. Like that
Like
praying
the
praying
moon was towed
mantises.
here by aliens.
Yeah, stuff like that.
That's
Or
cool.
that praying mantises, run the world.
Mhm. I've
But
heard
he
that.
was also very big on promoting the underground bases story that
Oh,
Benowitz would later, he would become as well very prominent in that, like especially with the Dulce base
yeah,
story,
the Dulce
which
War.
may have been an invention of Doty as well.
Hmm.
But Benowitz, I forgot to mention, was also, I think he was a pilot, a private pilot.
Mhm.
He was doing his own investigations near Dulce, like he would fly over the mountain or the mesa, is it called?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Mesa.
he would take photos, and he thought that he saw like alien craft there and stuff, military installations, and he thought that there was an underground base where gruesome experiments were going on. There's actually a lady there, Myrna Hansen, that he was friends with, and I think another lady who was she claimed that she had been abducted briefly by aliens, and she saw like some of the experiments going on, and then it morphed into a story that the government was actually allowing the aliens to kidnap people as long as they didn't harm the people, but then the aliens broke the treaty.
Right. Wasn't that with like Eisenhower?
Yeah, that Eisenhower signed some agreement
Hmm.
to allow the aliens a certain quota of citizens to kidnap, but they had to bring them back unharmed.
Yeah.
Right. Made famous in the well-known documentary film Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes.
Also, the storyline that they used to go with the Myth Arc and the X-Files.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know John Lear, of course, through the lens of Art Bell Coast to Coast. He was a pretty regular guest, and he was somewhat notorious on that show for two things. One was that he once proclaimed that when you are dying and the light appears, that you should not go to the light, you should go away from the light. And Art Bell regularly reported that this haunted him routinely. But the other thing John Lear did is he had what became colloquially known as the Lear test, which was this collection of statements about the presence of extraterrestrials and aliens and the nature of their danger to humans, including things like abductions, mutilations, implants, hybrids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
With this notion that he'd rattle off this long list. It's like listening to Campbell rattle off
Yeah.
the UFO list, only it's Lear talking about all the insidious and dangerous shit that the aliens are doing. And then at the end of it, he'd be like, all right, so knowing all of that, like, would you disclose that there's extraterrestrial life visiting Earth? And of course, the response when you hear that long list is no, of course not. People would get totally freaked out. It's totally worth listening to this excerpt or this interview if you ever have the chance to hear it, because it's also it draws really heavily on the Brookings Institute report from like I think the late 60s or early 70s, which also kind of made this similar claim that like any kind of disclosure would be so monumentally traumatic and disruptive to like all functioning parts of society that you shouldn't ever disclose anything.
Is that where that
Yes.
comes from? The Brookings report? Is that where that whole kind of narrative comes from? They're like, oh, they keep this
Yep.
hush because like, oh, the world couldn't take it, and think of all the religious people and stuff.
Yep. Even our friend, Dr. Stephen Greer, head of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Disclosure Project, tells us no after hearing the Lear test.
Incredible.
Yeah. Is Lewis doing the charts? How long does it take to do one, and which program is being used? I appreciate the nuts and bolts nature of this question.
It's actually, yes, I am doing them. And if you could put the link, Leah, to the article, which has got this chart so other people can look at it. But I use lucid.app, and I think it's got a, I don't know, I forget what the subscription fee is. It's not that expensive. But depends how long, how big it is. Like, so, you have to read a book or something to understand kind of the connections. And then once you understand those connections, doesn't actually take that long, but then you discover more things.
Mhm.
It's really kind of a challenge, if anything, to keep to stop adding stuff, because like everybody in the world is connected in some way, right?
Right.
So you have to decide like what is actually part of this narrative instead of not,
Sure.
and include the stuff that is instead of the stuff that isn't.
Yeah, you have. I'm scrolling through your blog right now, Lewis. Ufologyiscorrupt.com for anyone on the stream. I'm looking for. Wait, I think I just found it. This is just about a year old. I'm going to share this out in the chat right now for anyone tuning in.
There's a couple
Yeah.
of articles which have got the charts, or maybe 3 articles now.
Yep. Yeah, there's a handful of them. It looks
But
like.
go to the oldest one. That's the one with this chart, I think.
Oh my God. I'm Leah Prime, your host and on-stream internet navigator. I have a Lou Elizondo, Tom DeLong one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one you're talking about?
Can you show the? It's in that same article, so there should be multiple charts in the same article.
Yeah, I have an article. Yeah, I have an article open right here. I just shared it out. It's the UFO Scene Using Association charts. It's Paul Benowitz. It is Kehoe. Oh, NICAP, and then Lou Elizondo. So it's like a triumvirate of navigating the ins and outs of the ufology community.
So we're a little ways into this Benowitz story, but we haven't actually gotten to the conclusion of that. So we have Benowitz seeing things flying over the base that's basically on his front deck. He reports this.
Sorry.
Doty comes in, right? And he starts feeding him a UFO alien ET narrative. Basically, they're going on flights. They're they're flying over the base. I think there was a claim that Doty scattered out some false wreckage for him to see at some point too, right?
Right.
Or at least that.
Mm-hmm. Right. The photos that Benowitz took don't show anything very definitive. It's sort of like a Rorschach test. But I mean, Doty could well have done that. Again, we have to take anything he says with a grain of salt. But it's I also wonder about the legality of this stuff. If it was a sanctioned operation by a FOSI. Because Benowitz was like almost driven completely crazy.
Sure.
He ended up in a mental hospital. He had to go a lot of treatment. His sons had to take over the business. And, his wife was kind of really angry at the whole UFO genre because it was destroying her husband's life.
Right. And understandably and legitimately so, right? Like when you're thinking about the claims and behaviors being made by Doty and Benowitz being an isolated civilian, right, about these claims, to me having some kind of mental break or intense psychiatric response tracks. It seems like that's like a normal and even healthy response to these kinds of intercessions by the government or by these actors.
And I think Greg Bishop in the documentary Mirage Men, I think he also appears in it. He says, I think it was him, it might have been somebody else, but I think he says that the military could have just ordered Benowitz to not report anything he found, like with his electronic equipment.
Right.
Because like there are probably like national security acts, on the books to prevent those sorts of leaks if civilians find them. But instead they went through this whole elaborate disinformation campaign. So you have to wonder like what else they wanted to get out of that. It could have been a way of nabbing spies, like Soviet spies near the base.
Right.
And that's one of the big themes in Mirage Men is like the counterintelligence aspect, which I think, we have to think about that in terms of current events as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty relevant to that.
Yeah, that's what I always think of with regards to Lazar or Benowitz, is that it's almost pressure testing information distribution to have these like far-fetched claims um, or far-fetched information be presented to someone who subsequently goes on to disseminate it, because you can then I would guess, especially, pre-internet, pre-cell phones and stuff, you'd probably be able to build a pretty reliable like communication map or information map of how
Yeah.
things were passed person to person,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And then see that
by sort of
information was,
selectively distributing stuff. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lewis.
yeah, and then related to that, you can see like if you pick up chatter on the Soviet side
Hmm.
or the Chinese side, they say similar things, and then you can like figure out like who they're talking to
Mm-hmm.
Right.
in
Yeah,
the
you can
US.
triangulate it. Yeah, and I mean
Mhm.
the other thing to keep in mind too is like, look, like um radio broadcasts all over the place, and it doesn't particularly respect national and international boundaries. So if you're putting information out over radio or in any sort of unsecured signal, no matter what it is, like listeners are going to be able to pick it up. It's always been like a huge, like Radio Free Europe and Voice of Moscow
Mhm.
and stuff. Like when shortwave signals propagate to hit North America, Moscow makes sure to broadcast stuff that's very friendly and propagandistic for North American audiences. And similarly, like if Benowitz is encountering all this stuff that he's picking up from this base, it's not a long bow to draw to also assume that other people are listening into it as well, whether it's him or foreign actors or whatever. Like you don't have to be paranoid or conspiratorial to know that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh.
He was on Calling All Beings, fascinating, and makes more nut job claims than Dr. Greer.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I mean, Dore's whole sort of shtick seems to be like to talk about something and embed some reliable information into totally
Yeah.
wild ass claims.
Yeah. Speaking to what you were saying, Lewis, or at least a little earlier about why didn't the Navy just tell him to stop? I've even heard claims that Benowitz was a pretty patriotic guy and probably would have. We also
Yeah.
like Doty wasn't just screwing with him. I mean, he was using Bill Moore and funneling information, like I said earlier, to APRO. So it's going
Mhm.
into these big UFO communities and stuff like that. Where's the
Yeah.
motivation for that? That's probably not coming from the Navy, or is it?
Let's see. Well, maybe the UFO community could be used as a kind of conduit for disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to confuse
They-
things. Like if people are getting information about like stealth aircraft or secret projects, then you want to muddy that and you want to throw in some. And or it could just be again as a way of keeping track of like who's actually listening to these stories, because maybe
Mm-hmm.
the Chinese are interested. You know, this guy from the Chinese consulate just happens to be talking to this person from this UFO group.
Mm-hmm.
The people in the UFO group could be completely innocent, but they
Right.
might be getting used by a foreign power. That's probably the fear.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. What's this saucer smear up here?
Oh, that was Saucer Smear is it was a magazine, I think.
There's
A
like
UFO magazine. I think it's still active, if I'm not mistaken.
no,
No, it's not.
Is it the predecessor to the Bent Spoon? Is it a
no.
skeptic
Saucer
magazine?
Smear was kind of like a like what's going on in the UFO community sort of thing, satirical.
It's like National Enquirer. It's like Weekly World News. It's like Bat Boy, but for ufology.
I think
Yeah.
it was. I speak to a bunch of people and I keep hearing like rumors that it's going to be brought back by a couple people we know. But that was a long time ago that I heard that, so we'll see. But it might be in the works. I hope it still is.
And
Actually,
by the way, Bishop is actually in the chart. If you just go up a bit.
Oh, you
Yep,
found
there
him?
he is, Greg Bishop. Oh yeah, you
Yeah.
know what? It's interesting. He was actually in one of the classes I took with Diana Pasulka and presented
Mm.
on Benowitz. I took this class on spiritual initiation and ufology, and he talked about Project Beta. He's a super accessible guy. I think if we ever wanted to talk to him, I could probably get a hold of him.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his book is great.
I haven't read it.
Oh, Peter Gersten, man, I was just thinking of Peter Gersten because he shows up in all these old Coast to Coast
Yeah.
AM episodes from like the 90s, especially after the Phoenix Lights and stuff.
Is that the
It's
UFO lawyer?
the UFO lawyer, man.
Yeah, he was involved in the kind of grouping investigation of the Hudson Valley flap as well, where
Yes.
he linked up with like Bud Hopkins and Strieber.
Yeah.
He talks about jumping into portals now out in the desert. I think he was
That's
kind
right.
of
In Sedona, he like was
yeah,
waiting for a portal to open to jump into, and it didn't appear. He had to go
one of
home.
those vortex guys. He
Poor
also kind
Peter.
of started the precursor to the disclosure activists we see now. They had kind of a disclosure group going on.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this the one with Greer?
I don't
No,
think
is it
so.
kind of
I think it was in the
Oh.
70s. With,
predate it?
Yeah, it's
Oh, like
older.
much,
It's like
yeah,
the
much
Triple
earlier.
UFO Congress thing. This is a
yeah.
I
Mhm.
can't remember the name of the group. I mean, it's all the same thing. Now
Time is a flat circle.
he represented the experiencers of the Cash Landrum incident, right?
Did he?
Yes.
I thought.
Yeah, he did. Mm-hmm.
That's really
Yes.
interesting.
Mm-hmm. Cash Landrum, I'm not fully up to speed with though, so I could be wrong.
And by the
I,
way,
um,
Linda Moulton
Oh, go
Howe
ahead.
is also in this chart to the right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because this whole story got mixed in with like the cattle mutilations
Mhm.
stories. Because who's the guy? Gabe Valdez, the cop. So he was the cop out there, and he was doing investigations of mutilation cases. He came to the conclusion that the government was faking UFO sightings and getting cattle to, I think, test for radioactive tissue because they'd been doing like underground nuclear tests.
I've heard this. I've heard that
They
before.
did, yeah. Like there was a fear that it had contaminated the groundwater, and that maybe
Mhm.
you could detect, radioactivity in the tissues of animals. But they didn't want to, for some reason, like that just sounds like complete nonsense to me. Like the government could just purchase, they could just purchase, the Dulce cop.
Okay.
They could purchase cattle from farmers, right? Instead of
Right.
this whole
Yeah.
UFO shenanigans. It just doesn't
Sure.
seem logistically rational.
I still haven't
Yeah.
seen anything remarkable come out of any of the cattle mutilation stories either that doesn't look just like predation anyway. I know like they like to throw around the word surgical a lot, but yeah, that story doesn't really make any sense.
Should do an MST3K style watch of Strange Harvest. That's
I would
the
love that. And
Linda
UFO
Moulton
cover-up
Howe
live.
documentary and UFO cover up live. We should do. I want to do
Mhm.
Invisible High School where we all get extremely high and watch this stuff live and record it. That could be our Patreon content.
I'll watch that anytime. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Linda Moulton Howe, also noteworthy, just interviewed Marina Sarin. Not for Earth Files, but for like Gaia or something like that. Like one of those channels she
Why?
does content for.
Why?
I don't know, man.
Who wants to hear what she has to say?
Both sides, man. Free speech.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Free speech.
Yeah, she's still doing her thing. It's funny too, because like Earth Files is one of those things. Like I'll turn it on like at nighttime or just when I'm kind of futzing around because somehow, despite this subjective differences episode to episode, every episode sounds the exact same. It's just this kind of gentle new age hum in the background while I, do my tarot deck and cleanse my chakras and shit before getting in bed.
Oh, by the
But she's
way,
still at it, man. She's been banging that
yeah.
drum for like what, 40 years now?
hmm She actually came to the conclusion opposite of Valdez's. So Valdez thought that the government was like faking UFOs, um, and like that the aliens were kidnapping cattle, but it was actually the government doing that. Whereas Linda Moulton Howe said that it was actually the aliens faking
Faking the government.
helicopters. Yeah, leaving equipment around, like gas masks and whatnot, and
Mhm.
to make people think it was the government.
Incredible.
Where'd they get the gas?
Incredible.
They're super advanced
Nick.
beings.
Yeah, there's manifested them. Jesus.
Sure.
Come on,
Okay.
dude.
Yeah, whatever. That's wild. That's the Benowitz story, right? Did we leave
That's
anything
the
out in the
Benowitz
end?
story. Yeah, so I mean, what's the end of the story here? Benowitz winds up hospitalized,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think it
Institutionalized.
was in and out a couple of times, maybe.
Mhm.
And I don't remember if he tried self-harm, but he was like, he was right on the edge.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think he was returned back to his family home, and he didn't really go back into the UFO stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is
So you could say Doty did his job. Well, that's what he says. He did his job.
Sure.
To
You
like,
know who else was just doing their job? Doty.
Yeah, Doty.
Right. Yeah, just totally.
Doty said that he was doing his job in like
Yes.
stopping the leak from the base.
Yeah, even now, like back to that Twitter space, he kind of said that he was also implying that Benowitz was kind of mentally unwell the entire time, and that he didn't really have that great of an influence on it, and he was a paranoid person. But again, anything out of Doty's mouth, I don't recommend trusting. So,
but even if that's true, like it doesn't excuse doing that to somebody.
Sure,
like stirring them up even further.
Right.
Doty's still doing his job. Yeah, right. And that's like, look, this is an issue we hear come up even now in ufology and in this community, is that there are vulnerable people who've exhibited, mental instability, severe mental illness, et cetera, that are sort of covered by the community in many respects, or encouraged to sort of indulge these, I would say, aberrant thought patterns.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we see this going on now too. Yeah. And Doty, I mean, he was away from the community for a while, but like you said, like came back in swinging this summer in that Twitter space.
That was odd. I'm not really sure what the purpose of that was. Now, I also remember him talking about EBEs in that Twitter space, and it reminds me. I don't know how familiar you two are with Serpo, but I've heard that he is related to that in some way, or people kind of suspect that.
Again, I remember J-Rod, right, which was the name of the EBE, the extraterrestrial biological entity, and I remember this all making the rounds on Coast to Coast AM. And then there's that graphic novel too, the Serpo graphic novel, which I haven't read.
Me either.
Did you buy a copy of it?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It actually.
What do you think of it? Is it believable?
It's unbelievable. It's total nonsense, but it's very beautifully illustrated, and the story's quite nice as well. It's got a nice message, I think. Even though it's got a sad ending. Yeah.
That's nice. I didn't know that. That's cute. Nick is taking some kind of break. Yes, a potty break. Yes. Simon just chimed in with Doty is probably skint, which I think is what does that mean? Broke, poor, no money. From Luda, Doty was part Serpo and is believed to be the author of it. It was the document he showed Linda. Right. Yeah, like that's the other thing. We didn't really talk about this with Linda Moulton Howe, but in addition to like all of her contentions around cattle mutilation, et cetera, is like my understanding is she's pretty well known for also being this sort of landing and dissemination individual for misinformation, disinformation, like
Yeah.
anything to be disseminated out to the community.
You see that very clearly, actually, in her latest offerings in Alan Steinfeld's book, Making Contact. I
Hmm.
keep telling everyone to read Linda Moulton Howe's chapter in that book. It's completely insane. She claims
Yeah,
that she being told by like DIA insiders that there's a hollow Earth and that there are 3 species of aliens living underneath the
I mean this
ground.
this sounds like Vril, right?
Yeah, it's real.
Subterranean
Well,
Vril.
she talked about Nazi flying saucers in Antarctica. She literally talks about Vril, I think, as well, and like energy
Yes.
forces and stuff like that. The pyramids were like energy concentration machines to power slaves. It's just completely out of control.
It's incredible. I feel like I'm increasingly building this notion that like ufology and these ideas are almost like an augmented reality game that you overlay onto like daily life to make it much more
Mhm.
interesting. You know, especially when we're talking about this kind of stuff, this notion of like the pyramids at Giza as basically being giant orgone ray accumulators or whatever to charge up the slaves to make our
Yeah, yeah.
megaliths or whatever. Like
Mhm.
this is like a complete, these are like these are like 2 or 3 standard deviations away from what I think of as a kind of just boilerplate weird ufology stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
Linda's been making a living off this shit forever. I also, dude, I love that she sells Strange Harvest for like $40 and you get like a burned CD in like a Memorex plastic case.
Nice.
Like, she's refined her business model.
You know, I've never actually seen that. Do you have a copy?
I don't, unfortunately.
I'm sure we.
The reason I even know about any of this is because I caught Lou Jimenez on Cambian's show a couple weeks ago, and he was
Mhm.
talking about buying a copy of it. Um, and he said it's actually a really good documentary. Like it's really well produced, it's really well done. Um, we should do a group watch of it at some point.
Oh yeah, I'm down to watch that. We have a lot
Yeah,
of plans to do group watches of things. I feel like it never happens.
we should do it. We
Yeah.
should like really do it. Like I'm not now that I'm slowly re-entering. I'm leaving the land of degenerate unemployment and like re-entering the moneyed class. I'm like, oh, I have to make sure that I'm optimizing my time off. So watching UFO documentaries with weirdos from the internet seems like a good way to do that.
You're also working on a new article, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm working on a few different things. Yeah, I so I've been super fascinated by experiencers and
Mhm.
experiencer recollection and sort of this what I see as this kind of critical need to do ethnographic like research and listening with experiencers.
Yeah.
Um, which has sort of brought me around to this idea of um, UFOs in the popular imagination, right?
Mhm.
Because what I think tends to happen with just like with any kind of arcane subject, is I don't have a very good sense of what people who are not UFO people know about UFOs.
Right.
Um, and I say this because, like, when I talked to my parents after I came back from the New York City symposium, they thought I was at like a comic convention or like a Star Trek convention or something. And then I had to
Yeah.
be like, no, like, I just listened to like I just listened to like a professor at Stanford talk about, the caudate whatever the fuck, that thing in your brain that makes you
Yeah.
a star
Nolan,
seed.
Nolan was talking.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I know
and,
something like that.
I put out a call for these like long form interviews with people about um, what they know about ufology, what their perception is of the subject. I'm particularly interested in like when people talk about ufology, like what are the sort of associated disciplines that they're also referencing? Because it's almost never just straight flying saucers. There's usually kind of a constellation of additional subjects that they consider kind of falling broadly into the subject.
Mhm.
Um, but also, like, as I've been speaking to more and more experiencers, I'm super fascinated um, by this question of how people put two and two together. Like, when
Mhm.
people have an experience, how do they make the connection to it being a UFO or extraterrestrial? Like, what's the leap?
Right.
Um,
That's a good question.
and Yeah, and some people like I've gotten kind of a variety of answers. Like some of it is just like, I don't know, I just knew, which fine, whatever.
Sure.
Some people it's like literally media informed. Like, I didn't put two and two together, but then I watched the X-Files when I was like 17 or 18 and I was like, "Oh, I think this is kind of like what happened to me." And this provides me like a usable framework to understand. Um
I mean,
but
that
yeah.
narrative has existed in the media since nearly the beginning. So I can see that, like even casual interest, or even people not interested but like pick it up in passing. I'm sure a UFO special aired, or like, before the X-Files there was Unsolved Mysteries and Sightings, and before that, I
Twin
mean, there's
Peaks.
Twin Peaks. There was Project UFO back in the day that did reenactments of famous UFO cases. Like, it's existed in the media for a while. You hear a lot of people saying like, "Oh, in the modern times, this disclosure movement is lifting the stigma, and it's the narrative's becoming mainstream and stuff like that." But man, it has been. I was born in '83. It has been my entire life. It's always been there. I mean, that's what got me interested as a kid, was
Mhm.
seeing all this stuff on TV. I mean, that's where I learned UFO equals flying saucer equals, alien in a little vehicle. So
Yeah.
I, it's got to play at least a huge part of it. But I wonder, what people would say outside of the States. Do they have that kind of that link so ingrained? I don't know.
In Australia, we do. I used to watch the X-Files and all that stuff in the '90s.
Mhm.
Very much a ton of UFO documentaries back then as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I can't really speak to the the '70s because I was born in the '80s. But yeah, I mean, Australia is very similar to the US culturally. Um,
Sure.
I'm interested in what about like countries like I know that in countries in South America, there's a lot of UFO
Mm-hmm.
culture as well,
Yep.
like in
Mhm.
Chile and Argentina and Brazil.
I think
Um,
of Brazil as having a huge ufological
Mm-hmm.
preoccupation. Actually, I mean, I was just sharing earlier that there were some sightings yesterday that were being reported in Brazil. And of
hmm.
course, James Fox's latest documentary also about Brazil.
Yeah, those sightings earlier. That was a couple airlines, wasn't it?
Mhm.
I just caught a
Yeah,
glimpse of
reported
that.
yesterday. Yeah, I
Uh,
just saw it like maybe an hour before the live stream.
yeah.
One of my friends
Well,
tagged me on Twitter. It's
I
kind of
feel like
interesting.
like current UFO sightings are. I feel maybe I'm just not seeing them very often. I mean, there was this, and then there was the that one that Ben Hansen was peddling, which is very similar, more pilot sightings. But like, it's interesting. I want more UFO sightings to actually look into. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
take a deeper look at that maybe tomorrow.
I always and maybe this is a lazy assessment, but I always think too of like a lot of these events out of South America and Brazil as being more sinister in nature. I think that might be primarily shaped by Jacques Vallée, right? Like
Mhm.
his writings
Mhm.
on some of the events in South America leading to like actual injury or harm or whatever. Um,
Death, I think, in a few cases.
Death, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
he investigated the Colares case in Brazil,
Hmm.
where supposedly UFOs were like firing lasers or energy beams at people.
Hmm.
He also
mhm.
and Colavita's got a good article about this, but Valet claims that the CIA actually orchestrated some abductions in Latin America during the '70s
Hmm.
or '80s, and they passed them off as alien.
Hmm.
But it was actually like a CIA psychological operation. But like he doesn't show any proof. He says that he's got like a bunch of classified documents that he's going to release after his death.
Sure.
And Colavita's like,
Convenient.
fuck off. You just
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny because I read the first Secret Machines book.
Mm.
Not the I read the fiction one. I read the
Yeah.
first fiction one this summer, and I remember thinking, "Wow, this is like a pastiche of every single conspiracy theory I've heard of ever, like being kind of woven together. And to be clear, dude, that book was fun as hell to read. Like I blew through it in like 2 days. It was really entertaining. It was totally fine. But like that was the one thing I came across where they talk about like basically abductions being orchestrated and staged processes, like with people like dressed as aliens, but actually very much terrestrial behavior of capturing and experimenting on people. That was my first time encountering that.
Oh, that was another
in Secret
narrative.
Machines. Yeah, I'd never heard that before.
X-Files. I used
Is
that
that the one by DeLong?
one.
Yeah, it's DeLong and AJ Hardley, and then
Oh yeah,
Lavenda wrote the
Lavender. Yeah.
nonfiction counterparts.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I only
Yeah,
read
and
the first. I read the first nonfiction and the first fiction, and I have volume 2, but I haven't started them yet. They're in my room.
yeah, and just a bit more on Valet. Just
Yeah.
quickly. He makes a big deal about microwave radiation as like a way of manipulating perception. So he hypothesizes that the CIA was using like microwave emitters to, manipulate people's consciousness. And he also uses that as like a possible mechanism for the interdimensional beings to make people think that we're being visited by aliens. So he sort of, collapses all this together, as this mechanism of microwave radiation.
Now, what's he getting at from microwaves, like affecting people, or affecting people's consciousness?
Yeah, that you can like induce hallucinations and experiences by emitting microwave radiation at people's brains.
It sounds like
Sounds like Havana syndrome.
Yeah, or what's computed for that? Mm-hmm.
Just real quick, I want to address the comment I have on the screen here. Also had the Posadas in Latin America. They were pretty wild. Yeah, if you're interested in this, there's this amazing book called I Want to Believe, Posadism, UFOs, and Apocalypse Communism. It came out I think 2 years ago, and it's all about the Posadists and their ufological obsessions.
Nice.
Yeah. They were a Trotskyist sect, right?
Yes.
Yeah. They were one of the few communist groups pushing UFOs. You had like kind of left-leaning hippie type groups, but they were not overtly communist. But these guys were.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, they were definitely super communist Trotskyites. But then also had this like kind of paranormal UFO bent. It's kind of interesting.
You got to make it fun.
Yeah, man. Of course.
Luis, you got anything going on?
Well, I'm actually reading a lot about the origin of life. I've been reading Nick Lane's books.
Okay.
I'll do like future episode, maybe after next week. We could talk more about astrobiology and the origin of life.
Cool.
But it's like super interesting stuff that he writes. His books are The Vital Question, and the one that I finished just recently is called Transformer.
Okay.
Where he talks about
that's the new one. What did you think of that?
Yeah. Oh, it's excellent. But it's so complex. Like you're not going to get it the first time, I promise. But he talks about the evolution of the Krebs cycle, which is this metabolic pathway. It's really like at the heart of metabolism, but he talks about how it could have originated, how it can like go backwards under certain conditions, and different organisms use it differently. But he is very much about bioenergetics and metabolic systems more than genes. And he basically makes the point that biology has become too obsessed with information and not enough with metabolic systems.
Interesting.
He's trying to correct that.
I caught an interview with Bobby Azarian, The Romance of Reality, that just came out. Well, it came out like earlier this year. There was an interview with him on Mind Escape, and he talks a lot about this, about energetic systems basically leading to the evolution of life. I think David Deutsch talks about some of this stuff as well. So it's kind of cool to hear those conversations moving forward, because I think at the heart of it is complexity science, which is super fascinating.
Yes. But it's got a lot of implications for like the conditions we would find excuse me, extraterrestrial life. So we could find it possibly in places like Europa and Enceladus. These are ice moons in the solar system.
Right.
Like you've got a layer of ice and then an ocean underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have these hydrothermal vents that he talks about, you might have metabolic systems evolving and then proper life per se. So interesting thing to consider is that maybe those ice worlds are actually the most common incubators of life in the universe instead of our type of planet.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, if you have those sorts of conditions, you could probably get life pretty easily. But he does claim that there are certain constraints that you can't just. It's not just about having liquid water, right? You also need these other things going on, like separation of alkaline and acidic water, and then that facilitates like electron transport and all this other stuff, which we associate with metabolism. And he goes through some of the steps involved, like how you can get more complex carbon, organic matter,
Mm-hmm.
arising. And it's just super fascinating. He also makes the point that probably complex life, like eukaryotic life, for example, animals would probably be very rare in the universe.
Hmm.
And that's, for reasons he goes into to do with energetics. But I can get more into that when we go to that.
Yeah,
topic.
that sounds cool.
That's super cool. Yeah. What about you, Nick? What's going on?
Nothing. I'm slowly still working on my report on Lake Michigan, especially after the new episode came out, and working on more plans to harass MUFON to release some of those videos so I can take a look at them and other people can take a look at them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I love to hear it. What's going on with oh, sorry, go ahead. I'll ask you about Invisible Residence in a second.
Oh, we were kind of shifting over, and we're going to start doing some pre-produced content that we're going to throw up too. And I think last time we talked, right, was talking about writing something up on Zodiac that I was going to throw together in a video and stuff like that. He went.
So cool.
Apparently, there's some new theories involving in this case. I'm not a big Zodiac buff, so I'm looking forward to what he comes up with. Essentially, his written material that I'm gonna edit and produce a video on. But
are you a true crime guy? Like at all?
A little bit. Like, missing persons are always interesting to me more than the actual the grisly true crime stuff. But any types of like weirdness or mystery, I'm pretty into. So like. I don't follow any specific cases in true crime or anything like that, though.
What about you, Lewis? Are you a true crime guy?
I'm a true detective guy.
Just
season 1. No, but I do enjoy some documentaries on Netflix, like Murder Among the Mormons. That's a great one. And I think another one I watched there was this great one about this young man who faked being an American teenager. Do you know that one? It's super creepy. Like nothing bad happened in the end. He got exposed and he went to jail for a bit. But he's this guy from France who's like all his life he's been doing like these sorts of hoaxes and he couldn't help himself. So he faked being this teenager who disappeared. So he went to like Arizona or something and then
yes, I know about this story, but not from like the perspective of him, but the story of the missing teenager. And then they thought they had found him briefly. Who was that? It's pretty vague. I think I've heard of that one before, though. Really strange.
Brooke reports that season 2 is also good.
True Detective.
Season 2 is very. I don't know. I'll just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, that show is like it's like a Lovecraft thing, isn't it?
A little bit. It's got some cosmic horror elements to it.
Okay, I can appreciate that.
They're not like really like at the center.
Yeah,
of it, but it does have some existential stuff about philosophical pessimism and stuff like that.
That sounds good. Yeah, I mean, man, there's so much stuff I gotta catch up on watching and reading, but I've always been intrigued. None of the people I reached out to jump on the call have gotten back to me. I don't have any special guests.
People have lives. They're all doing stuff, and we're just hanging out at 10:30 on an internet stream. Yeah, I mean, we like I'm gonna go ahead and plug our upcoming shows though, because we have some cool stuff coming up, right?
Yeah.
So next week, Wednesday, November 9th, we're going to be broadcasting at a different time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, because we'll be joined by Dr. Massimo Teodorani to talk through plasma physics, UFOs, all that good stuff. Super excited to have him join. Yeah, Hestelin.
Say that wrong?
No, you said it right.
Hestelin,
whatever.
Whatever.
That place in Norway with the weird lights.
Yeah.
So Dr. Teodorani is going to be joining us. We'll have Campbell back as well. And then the week after, which is the 16th, we'll be joined by Rather Be Squidding to talk through, whatever he's working on, whatever we're working on, I guess. Hopefully by then we'll have a government report that we might be able to discuss roundtable style.
Sure.
So we have a few good shows coming up. Certainly, if anyone has any guest or topic recommendations, feel free to reach out. Always love to hear from viewers, listeners, participants, etc. And I think we're going to keep sticking with this Wednesday evening time slot. We're not competing with anyone else. Like, I don't want to step on any toes with like UFO Jane Rather on Thursday nights.
Right.
Nick, you're doing your thing Tuesday nights. Like Wednesday night feels like a nice kind of like break in the week. Good time to connect and collect. And Saturday nights are quickly becoming like social nights again after 2.5 years of COVID.
Speak for yourself.
They're becoming social for me.
Yeah. I don't leave the house. How could I? That's good to hear you booked Rather. I wasn't sure if that was for sure or not. That'll be interesting. And that's back at the normal time, right? Wednesday at
that'll be back at the normal time, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We have a request from David here to bring on Susan Goff. Man, if she even catches whiff of anything ufological, she's not going to want to talk to any of us, and I don't blame her.
No, not at all.
Like that poor woman. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm showing too much sympathy for the devil, but like I gotta say, like the sort of collective response and treatment of her is pretty. I don't know.
I can't talk too much trash. She's who signs my checks.
Is she? No. Oh, I see. You're making a joke about being an op. Yeah, I know, dude. It's all intel operatives here in the Invisible Night School.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, look. Are there any parting words from either of you gentlemen?
Trust no one.
That's fair.
I don't know. Watch season 1 of True Detective. You'll love it.
Okay. I guess I need to watch UFO Live. What is it?
Yes, watch UFO Cover Up Live.
Yeah,
UFO Cover Up Live.
So
beautiful.
Good. So good.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Listeners,
Thanks.
Audience, participants, etc. So great to have you guys as always. And with that, I guess we'll wrap up the show.
See you next
week. Have a
week.
nice night.
Earlier time.